Why, hello there. How's it going, everybody? Welcome to D&D Optimized, part of the D4 network. This show where each week we take a deep dive into one, sometimes two specific character builds for Dungeons & Dragons 5e, and we theorycraft about them, we crunch numbers about them, and basically try to create a character that is both very powerful and also a lot of fun to play in-game. So if you enjoy creating characters for D&D almost as much as you enjoy playing the actual game itself, then welcome home. This is a place for you, and I'm super happy to have you. My name's Colby, and I'll be your host, so thanks for being here. Before we get started, I have a little favor to ask everybody today. When you're on your social medias, your Twitters and your Facebooks, etc., and you see people asking for a recommendation of like an actual play D&D campaign, especially right now while Critical Role is on a bit of a hiatus at the time of this recording anyway, I would be super grateful if you guys would give Tales of Veneria a little plug. That's our actual play session that we've been doing for a few weeks now, having a lot of fun. I've honestly never had as much fun playing at a table ever, I think, and so it's great. I hope you guys are enjoying it, and of course, if you haven't seen it, it's never too late to check it out. I would really appreciate a plug, as would my friends. We've had some good following and some nice growth, but we'd love to see even more. So anyway, if you think about it, if you could be so kind, and if you're not particularly a fan or don't really want to, that's okay too. I still love you. Anyway, let's jump into the episode today. I assumed that everyone would be sort of sick of burst damage spells by now, but I put a poll up last week to see if you guys wanted me to do something other than the burst damage single target caster build that I had kind of hinted at last week, or something else. And the single target blaster won by about a 2-to-1 ratio. So here we are. And you know what? I'm actually glad the vote turned out the way it did, because I think this is probably the strongest single target burst damage character I've built to date. So much damage. It's a little ridiculous, particularly in the late game. Let's preamble. I think I mentioned last week that to date, all of my Nova damage builds have been weapon users. I think that, of course, with the exception being last week, the area of effect Nova damage build, but definitely all of my single target damage builds to date have been weapon users. And, you know, when it comes to burst damage, weapon users do have quite a few advantages over spellcasters. First up, there are a lot of on a weapon attack you do extra damage type abilities in the game. Smite is perhaps the strongest and most well known, but Battle Masters, can get bonus damage on weapon attacks. Whispers Bards get extra damage on weapon attacks. Sneak attack, for example, etc., all come into play, amongst others. By contrast, there are fewer, not none, but fewer, on hit you do extra damage abilities in the game that also can apply to spells. Then we also have things like the Great Weapon Master feat and the Sharpshooter feat. They kind of fall into, the above category, that first category, but I think they deserve special mention. This is a big advantage to give you, an extra 10 damage per hit at the cost of 5, minus 5 to hit, I know. But plus 10 damage on every single attack, that's a huge advantage, and frankly, spellcasters don't really have anything like that to compete with, right? Plus 10 flat damage on a hit is a lot of damage. It's really the equivalent of like 2d8, a little better than 2d8, especially if you're getting multiple attacks. Speaking of multiple attacks, another advantage that weapon users tend to have when it comes to burst damage especially is that for weapon users, it's a lot easier, I would say, to get multiple attacks per turn and thus more easily benefit from those on-hit effects. A few spells will give you multiple attacks in a turn, but most don't. Even cantrips like Firebolt that scale per level, when you hit level 5, when you hit level 11, etc., they go up in damage, but not in number of attacks. The exception here, the most famous exception, of course, is Eldritch Blast. Even though it does scale, Eldritch Blast does scale fairly well and has the added benefit of being a cantrip, thus is kind of sustainably usable. I've done 2 builds now that focus on Eldritch Blast. The Eldritch Sorcerer build, which was one of my earliest ones, and also the Undead Support Lock, which was more recent. I plan on doing another build in the nearish future, I think, that is kind of an Eldritch Blast focused build. So I wanted to take a different route here, and the way that we end up going actually does even more damage, though at the cost of spell slots, so it's not really sustainable. It's kind of more burst damage focused. Martial characters, weapon users, I mean, most of them just kind of very easily can get extra attack when they hit like 5th or sometimes 6th level. If you're a fighter, you can get even more. You can weaponize your bonus action to continue to take advantage of on-hit effects, etc., especially with Polearm Master Feat. So it's just a little bit easier and sort of built in, I think, for weapon users to kind of get additional attacks per turn. Also, weapon users get to add their ability score modifier to every attack that lands, depending on what kind of weapon they're using, if they have the right feat or fighting style, etc., right? But off the top of my head, I can't really think of any spellcaster abilities that let me add my spellcasting ability modifier to the damage of every single spell attack, outside of Agonizing Blast and Eldritch Blast. But again, I've already mentioned that we're not going to go that route here. Sure, there are plenty of things that will give you like maybe once per turn or once per spell that will let you add your ability score modifier to the hit, but not a lot, or maybe not any, that will let you add your ability score modifier to every hit of a spell attack, again, outside of Eldritch Blast. The question that I've been having is, can a single target focused spellcaster who's not using Eldritch Blast actually keep up with weapon users for single target burst damage? I think the answer is yes. But in order to do so, we'll need to take sort of the best concentration spells for damage that we can find and combine them with a spell or spells that hit an enemy with multiple attacks, while stacking as many on-hit damage modifiers as we can to take advantage of all those hits. And of course, any way we can increase our plus to hit or give ourselves advantage will also be super important, just like with weapon user. Can we do all of those things and still make up for the fact that we don't have Great Weapon Master or Sharpshooter or Sneak Attack damage or Divine Smite, etc.? My goodness, yes we can. And to that end, I humbly present episode 45, the Flamethrower Sorcerer. Let's dig in. And by the way, my apologies for my voice today. I lost my voice yelling myself hoarse at a jazz game a week ago, and it still hasn't quite fully recovered. So it's a little more gravelly than normal, and maybe now is the time to do that ASMR video that some of you have been asking about. At level 1, for our class, we are going to start Sorcerer. I know. I'm doing a Sorcerer build, and I'm actually starting as a Sorcerer. It's crazy. It won't happen again. So Sorcerers get Constitution saving throw proficiency. Thus, I feel a little less obligated to start like Fighter or something with them. Plus, I think with this build, in particular, getting to those kind of mid-level spells is even more important than in some of the other builds that I do, and even more important than Action Surge, I think. So we'll get there. As for your race, I'm going to recommend that we go Kobold here. I like it for thematic reasons. You'll see why in a second. But also because of the pack tactics feature that kobolds get. For those who aren't familiar with pack tactics, as long as one of your allies is standing within 5 feet of the enemy that you are attacking, and your ally isn't incapacitated, you have advantage on attacks against that enemy. There are a lot of ways to get advantage in the game, but getting them on every single attack is difficult for casters to do without heavy investment elsewhere, or the use of a concentration spell like Fairy Fire, Darkness plus Devil's Sight, Invocation, things like that, right? We want our concentration for other things. And so even though there are plenty of free feats that I would love to have and that usually therefore encourages me to go like custom lineage or variant human, I want reliable concentration-free advantage even more. Now, of course, kobolds also have a drawback to them, and that is sunlight sensitivity, which is a bummer, because it means that you have disadvantage on attack rolls and on perception checks that rely on sight when you, the target of your attack, or whatever you are trying to perceive, is in direct sunlight. We might get a way to help counter that later. But basically, this race probably wouldn't be best if you think you're going to be fighting outside a lot in the daytime when there are no clouds in the sky and you're not in the forest in the shade or something like that, right? Because, I mean, we are talking direct sunlight here. So if it's cloudy, you should be okay. If you're under a tree, you should be okay. But if the sun is shining directly on you or your enemy, etc., you're in trouble. Now, of course, fortunately, if you're using pack tactics, then the disadvantage from the sunlight and the advantage from pack tactics would cancel each other out. So you would just be making attacks as normal. But anyway, try to avoid broad daylight when you can. As for ability scores, assuming point buy as usual, I'm going to recommend starting with a 15 charisma and then taking our +2 from the racial there. And again, as always, I'm using Tasha's, meaning that we can assign the +2 and the +1 ability score increases to whatever ability scores we want. Hopefully your DM is okay with using Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. 13 Constitution +1, giving us 14, right? 14 Dexterity and a 13 Wisdom. As for equipment, pretty standard stuff, nothing special. Make sure you have some clothes and an arcane focus and, weapons if you want them. But then at level 1, sorcerers get their sorceress origin, their subclass. And we are going Draconic Bloodline. So you're a kobold, right? Naturally, the magic flowing through your veins is due to your draconic ancestry, is it not? It makes perfect sense. We get a lot of nice things from this origin. They're great for us, numbers-wise. First off, you have to pick your dragon ancestor, the damage type of which is going to matter for us later. We're going to want fire, of course. We are a flamethrower, after all. So grab, brass, gold, or red for your dragon ancestor, whichever is your favorite. I personally really love the idea of a gold kobold. You do you. Now, for those interested, there is another version of this build that goes Divine Soul Sorcerer instead. I don't like it as much thematically, personally, and it's also, there are pros and cons to it from a numbers perspective, but it does have some nice pros in that it gives you some added versatility, but it's a little bit squishier. The damage numbers are better sometimes, worse other times. Stay tuned for the final thoughts segment at the end. I will discuss kind of that Divine Soul option a little bit more in depth. So stay tuned if that interests you. Then also, Divine Soul Sorcerers get Draconic Resilience. This is another reason why I don't feel too bad not starting with fighter levels. Our skin is covered with dragon-like scales. They work kind of like natural armor, giving us an AC of 13 plus our dex modifier of 2. So, we're at a 15 AC right now. It's not as good as, say, having medium armor would be. But it is as good, at least, as mage armor, and saves us a spell slot from having to cast mage armor. We also get 1 more hit point per level from Draconic Resilience, so it's kind of like we're a D8 character instead of a D6, which is nice. It'll definitely increase our tankiness. Then we have to choose spells. We get some cantrips, we get some first level spells. I would just say, you're going to want Firebolt because it's a solid damage dealing cantrip that we get to cast at range, and you make a spell attack in order to do the damage. Poison Spray might be slightly more damage from a dice perspective, but it's a con save. It's a poison damage type, which is more often resisted by enemies, and it's only like a 10-foot range on it. So anyway, plus fire is kind of our jam. Mind Sliver is a good one to deal a little damage and then cause the enemy to have to subtract a 1d4 from their next save before your turn, barring an intelligence save. So it can be a nice way if you've got an ally caster in your group to sort of guarantee that your friend's spell is going to stick on their turn, that kind of thing. As for level 1 spells, I would take Burning Hands. It's a decent early level area of effect option. It's a 15-foot cone, does 3d8 of damage, barring a dexterity saving throw, plus fire. And then either Catapult or Magic Missile for single target damage. Catapult lets you hurl a 1 to 5 pound object at an enemy, and they have to make a dexterity saving throw or take 3d8 damage. Magic Missile, of course, lets you shoot 3 1d4 plus 1 darts at your enemy or enemies, and they don't miss, and they don't require a saving throw. So, the dice on Catapult is better. And the spell can be especially potent if you get up to some crazy shenanigans like hurling a vial of acid at your enemy that might explode when it hits them and do extra damage. Talk that over with your DM, make sure that would work. But anyway, the downside, of course, of Catapult is that unlike most offensive spells that require a saving throw, if the enemy makes their saving throw, they take no damage. So depending on their saving throw and their likelihood of making it, you might be better off with Magic Missile. You decide. But that's level 1. At level 2, we get Font of Magic. We get sorcery points now. And although we don't have any meta magic options yet to spend them on, we get these 2 sorcery points. We get 1 more sorcery point per level. For now, we can just use them to convert them into additional spell slots, right? So we can turn, as a bonus action, we can turn our sorcery points into spell slots. Right now, we could just do 1 first level spell, because a first level spell costs 2 sorcery points, and the cost of sorcery points goes up as the spell level that we want to convert goes up, right? Capping at a spell slot of 5th level, we can't go higher than that, and that would cost us 7 sorcery points. A great way to regain spells if we need them, and then of course we can also do the reverse and take our spell slots if we don't need them and convert them into sorcery points as well. But we won't be needing to do that until we get meta magic options, which happens at level 3. So at level 3, we now get 2nd level spells. As always, there's a lot of great options. I'd probably want Misty Step at some point, but we might have a way to get that for free later. Web is always a great option, for control, but the 2 that I'm going to focus on are, number 1, Dragon's Breath. It's way too on point to have this cute little baby dragon kobold draconic sorcerer belching cute little dragon's breath in a 15-foot cone repeatedly. So it requires concentration, and then once you cast it on yourself and maintain your concentration every turn, you can do this 3d6 cone of damage, barring a dexterity saving throw, and you get to choose the damage type, basically from any of the sort of dragon breath damage types, fire, acid, cold, lightning, poison, etc. Of course, we got to go fire, right? I would definitely go that route, but then we get to our main bread and butter for the rest of our characters' existence, really. And the reason that we couldn't delay Sorcerer levels for anything, Scorching Ray. So, Scorching Ray really just sort of checks all of our boxes. It's fire damage. It's a pretty hard-hitting single-target spell. It does three rays of fire, right, that do 2d6 damage each for a total of 66 damage, potentially at 120-foot range, which is great. And it's fairly unique amongst spells in that it scales pretty well. For every level you upcast it, you get another ray, another 2d6 ray. And the higher that we upcast it, the more hits it does, right? So it's not just that the damage goes up, it's that you get another attack. And that is going to be particularly potent for what we're trying to do. Keep in mind, like we talked about at the beginning, one big advantage that weapon users tend to have over spellcasters, for Nova damage especially, is that they fairly easily get ways to add more attacks to their turn, which lets them thus take advantage of lots of great on-hit, you do more damage type things. This Scorching Ray is one of the only, and in my opinion, the best ways for a caster to get some of that same benefit, but using a spell. The fact that you start with 3 attacks right here at level 3 as a level 3 character, and that it scales by 1 more attack with each spell slot that you upcast it at, makes it potentially very, very strong. Compare that to, most weapon users aren't going to be able to get 3 attacks on their turn until their 5th level, and at that point, we would have third level spells and could make 4 attacks with Scorching Ray, right? So if we can find ways to add damage to each of those hits, things can get pretty crazy pretty quickly. Like I said, Scorching Ray is going to be our main attack going forward, and we're going to be looking for ways to take advantage of all of those attacks. Keep in mind that because we're making attacks, as long as the enemy is within 5 feet of one of our allies, and they're not in direct sunlight, we will have advantage on those attacks, thanks to pack tactics. Woot. Also, at level 3, we get our meta magic options, our first meta magic options. We get 2, and I think it's pretty clear the ones that we want to go with, at least for now. First up, Quicken Spell. So you spend 2 sorcery points, and you can then cast a spell that normally costs an action as a bonus action. Keep in mind that if we cast a spell as a bonus action, even if we're doing so using Quicken Spell, the only other spells we can cast that round as an action are cantrips. For now, our little level 3 burst round of damage would simply be, Quickened Spell Scorching Ray, and then a cantrip Firebolt. And honestly, at this level, at level 3, it's 26.5 damage on average if everything hits, which is pretty solid for a level 3 character, right? So Quicken Spell is great and will just come in handy for us, especially here in these first few levels. As for the other meta magic option, I think we've got to go with the new option from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, Transmuted Spell. Transmuted Spell tells us that if you cast a spell that does acid, cold, fire, lightning, poison, or thunder damage, you can spend 1 sorcery point to change that to another one of those damage types, right? This is awesome. It's super versatile, and it makes me feel like a lightning bender from the Avatar world, right? Most of the time, you're using fire, but every once in a while, you can change it to lightning if you really want to. The truth is, as a flamethrower, we're hyper-focused on these fire spells, and while you're probably not running into a lot of enemies at level 3 that are going to be resistant to fire damage, there are quite a few monsters in D&D that are resistant to fire damage. And so, having something in your pocket for those times that you run into something that's resistant or, heaven forbid, immune to fire damage, well, being able to change it on the fly to another damage type is just going to be absolutely imperative, I think, for this build. And later on in the build, we'll actually be making use of this for some pretty fun shenanigans. At level 4, we get our first ability score increase, or feat, and I'm going to recommend that we take Fey Touch. This is new, as per Tasha's, a new feat, and it's really powerful, and I love it a lot. It's a half feat, so it lets us take a +1 to charisma in our case, giving us an 18 charisma, which is fantastic. It also gives us the Misty Step spell for free, letting us add a different spell to our repertoire, because surely we had Misty Step already. Maybe not, actually. Sorcerers don't get that many spells. They're not like wizards. So anyway, now we have Misty Step, and Misty Step is very strong. And it also lets us cast Misty Step once per day for free, freeing up a spell slot, potentially. So that's great. Those things in and of themselves are really nice, but it's made even better by the fact that we get to choose another first level spell for free that we can cast once per day, so long as it's in the divination or enchantment school of magic. And this means we get to add our first on-hit you do more damage ability in the game, the Hex spell. Hex is typically only available to warlocks. As you probably know, if you've been watching this channel for a while, I like to use it a fair bit. It's really great. So you cast it as a bonus action, requires your concentration, and then every turn thereafter that you hit, you make an attack that hits the target that is hexed. They take an extra 1d6 of damage. You can also choose one ability score to impact your target with, and basically, as long as they're hexed, any skill checks that they make using that ability score, they have disadvantage on. If the target dies that's hexed, you can, as a bonus action, transfer it to another target. Anyway, it's fantastic. I love it. It's very strong for us, and it makes me super happy that we get to have it, along with all of the other nice little perks that we get from Fey Touch. At level 5, we get third level spells. There are too many good third level spells to list, but of course, you have to have Fireball, right? Because we are a little baby dragon flamethrower, and also it's the best area of effect damage spell in the game at level 5, right? 8d6 damage, 20-foot radius sphere, pending a dex save. And the awesome thing about Fireball is that we have Transmute spell, so we could transmute that if we needed to, or just wanted to for fun, into an acid ball, or a lightning ball, or a thunderball if we wanted to, which is a great image. And Thunderball sounds like a really terrible B-movie starring like a bunch of kobolds in a post-apocalyptic world where they go to like dance parties that also happen to be deadly survival of the fittest contests or something like that. Isn't Thunderball a James Bond movie, actually, now that I think about it? So, okay, starring Sean Connery as the lead kobold. Lots of other good third level spells, of course. Hypnotic Pattern, Counterspell. We're not going to use any of them in our Nova round. We're just going to be upcasting our awesome little Scorching Ray. At level 6, as a Draconic Sorcerer, we get Elemental Affinity. So, when we cast a spell that does fire damage, because of our Draconic ancestor, red, gold, brass, right? We get to add our Charisma modifier to 1 damage roll of the spell. It's too bad that we don't get to add it to every hit of a spell like weapon users do by default, right? But I'll take a +4 damage. That's our Charisma modifier right now. +4 damage to 1 of the Scorching Rays anyway. Keep in mind that this works for each and every fire damage spell that we cast. So Fireball would get a +4 damage to everything, right? Firebolt, it doesn't have to be of a spell slot spell. It can be a cantrip. Or even if we were to, transmute, say, Lightning Bolt or something else into a fire spell, we'd get that extra damage, which is a nice little bump that makes me feel even more like a flamethrower. Our first damage report, level 6. For this damage report, this is what our Nova round looks like. First of all, it's going to take a setup round, as most of my Nova damage builds do. First off, we really want to get Hex going. And again, even though it's only a bonus action to cast, if we used it on our turn, then we wouldn't be able to cast Scorching Ray as our action that turn. So we're going to start off, we're going to bonus action Hex our target, and then as our action, we can cast Firebolt, right? So that will be a nice little kind of soften them up for the incoming Nova. And then round 2, we would be actually Quicken Spell Scorching Ray. So we're using that as a bonus action, and then again as our action, another Firebolt cantrip. That's 4 rays. We're using a 3rd level spell slot here, so 4 rays that each hit for 2d6 plus 1d6 for Hex, plus 4 to the first ray that hits for our Elemental Affinity, and then again on the action, you're talking a Firebolt, which would do a 2d10 now that we've passed 5th level, plus 1d6 for Hex, it works, it stacks, plus 4 again for Elemental Affinity. All of those attacks made with advantage, again, assuming we're not in direct sunlight and we've got a friend standing next to them. So, against an enemy with a 10 armor class, we would be doing, on average, 69 damage in that Nova round. And against an enemy with a 15 armor class, it would be 63 damage on average. Not bad. Kind of in the upper middle section compared to other Nova builds that I've done to date. Very competitive. Admittedly, you might not be able to do this level of damage after every single short rest, like most of my other Nova damage builds that I've created can do. But actually, thanks to being able to turn sorcery points into spell slots, and only using 1 3rd level spell slot for this right now, you will be able to do this at least 2 times per long rest, if not 3. And I think, most of us are probably only getting 2 to 4 combat encounters per long rest. So we should be able to do this on most of our encounters. At level 7, we are going to be multiclassing into Fighter. You knew it was coming. We've got 3rd level spells. We've got a decent number of spell slots and sorcery points under our belts. I think it's time to take this plunge. To really make the build shine, we need to try and find a way to get more attacks And sure, upcasting, Scorching Ray will get us that, but there's a way to get even more, even faster. So for us, we're going a couple levels into fighter here. Now, you need to decide with your DM, do you want to find a story reason to take another class here, or are you just calling your class the Flamethrower class or the Elemental Draconic Warrior class or something that's essentially a caster who happens to have a very deep connection to one of their dragon ancestors and a worshipful almost relationship with them, as well as some martial training? If you need a story reason, here's one you could plagiarize. Let's see, your spellcasting focus is an old dragon tooth dagger that legend says belonged to one of your ancient ancestors and has been passed down for generations in your family. Now, something has awakened within this dagger. It's talking to you. It's channeling the spirit of this ancient dragon ancestor who has recognized you as a potential worthy vessel to inherit their power. But they have a task for you. Before it can share with you this task and the greater power that it has to bequeath you, you must cleanse and hone your body, the vessel itself. So it's time to undergo some martial training. As a fighter, at level 1, we get some additional proficiencies. We get medium armor and shield proficiencies. We don't get heavy armor proficiency when you multi-class into fighter, only if you start there. But we're thrilled with medium armor and shields. It's going to, assuming you have 750 gold to afford half plate at this point, you're equipping a shield. Well, now you're a cute little kobold in half plate and a shield that's just here to watch the world burn with a 19 armor class. Fighters at level 1 also get second wind. It's just a nice little heal. It gives you, once per short rest, 1d10 plus your fighter level in healing. Not as good as it was at low levels, but still, we'll take it. Just a little heal buff. And then we do get a fighting style. And we're about to delve into the world of see if you can convince your DM of something. So bear with me. A couple of weeks ago, we discussed in my Sliding Into My DMs talk show that I do on the channel here, this question. And if you didn't catch the episode, I highly recommend it, so check it out. But anyway, the question came up. If a kobold was blindfolded or closed their eyes, would they still suffer disadvantage from sunlight if they also had the blind fighting style? Hang on, just hang on. Here's how sunlight sensitivity reads from the kobold description. You have disadvantage on attack rolls and on perception checks that rely on sight when you, the target of your attack, or whatever you are trying to perceive, is in direct sunlight. Now, if we interpret this as you have disadvantage on attack rolls when you or your target is in direct sunlight, and disadvantage on perception checks that rely on sight when you and what you're trying to perceive is in direct sunlight, then no, this won't work. If, on the other hand, we interpret this as, and I think this is a perfectly valid interpretation based on my knowledge of the English language, you have disadvantage on attack rolls that rely on sight and on perception checks that rely on sight when you or your target are in direct sunlight, then I think blind fighting could benefit us here. I mean, what it boils down to is really a conversation with your DM, right? To discuss, is there something about the sun that physically hurts kobolds and makes them woozy? Or like it burns their skin or something like that? Or is it that their eyes aren't properly adjusted to the bright sun, and so if they weren't blinded by the sunlight, they would be fine? Based on the fact that it talks about your perception checks if what you're trying to perceive is in direct sunlight, I would think that it's the latter. It's all about that you're used to being underground. It's too bright, you can't see, right? I'm sure some of you are rolling your eyes right now. That's fine. I have a feeling that some of you will have my back on this, and I'm totally okay if you want to argue about it in the comments. But if you and your DM agree that, blindfolding yourself, or maybe just closing your eyes really tight, even in direct sunlight, and taking the blind fighting style would get rid of the sunlight sensitivity disadvantage, then this is amazing for us, right? Because with blind fighting, we can effectively see anything within 10 feet that isn't behind total cover, even invisible creatures. That increases the risk to us for sure, because now we're within 10 feet of our enemies. Previously, we could attack them from 120 feet away. But I'm less worried about our squishiness now that we have a 19 armor class. And honestly, this could make for some fantastic story, roleplay, like character development moments, right? As your elemental warrior learns to overcome their fear of the sun, reach out with their other physical senses, right? As instructed by their ancestor, closing their eyes, maybe even blindfolding themselves, becoming centered, using the force, reaching out to turn their foes to ash, even when they can't see them. I mean, you are making a heavy investment here, giving up a fighting style, and it puts you more directly in harm's way than you otherwise would be. I have to believe that a lot of DMs would support you in this one, but if not, that's okay. I would probably just take the defense fighting style here then and raise our armor class by 1, which is not a bad consolation prize, because now we're a cute little kobold sorcerer with a 20 armor class, and that's awesome. At level 8, we're a fighter 2, and yes, that means we get action surge. And again, to clarify, and I maybe didn't do a good enough job of this last week. Oh, I haven't even linked to it. I might be out of cards. Anyway, last week, area of effect, burst damage, spellcaster, the evoker. Yeah, we can cast 2 spells with a casting time of 1 action if we have action surge on the same turn, right? The prohibition here is, according to the rules, is against casting a spell as a bonus action and then casting another spell as your action. If you cast a spell as a bonus action, the only other spell you can cast as your action is a cantrip. So as long as we don't use our bonus action to cast a spell, there is nothing prohibiting us from using a spell-slotted spell, casting it as our action, and then action surge and cast another spell of a spell slot as an action with a casting time of 1 action, right? There's no prohibition against this. So going forward on our Nova round, we're just got to make sure that we don't cast a spell as our bonus action, and we'll be fine. At level 9, it's time to go with yet another multi-class dip, I think, to really make this build shine. I think we need to try and find another way to add damage to each attack during our burst round. And so for us, yes, we're going to go with a level of Warlock here. To continue our little character's story here, now that we've spent some time honing our senses and our physical vessel, our ancestor has decided that we are ready for their full patronage. So yes, this dragon-tooth dagger that has been talking to us and is the physical representation of our ancestor has now become our patron, and yes, we're going Hexblade. So as a level 1 Warlock Hexblade, we get a couple of things. We get Hexblade's Curse, and it's the main reason that we're here, right? For burst Nova damage builds, it's really hard to beat this ability, especially for a caster that's trying to get a lot of attacks, because it's one of the easiest and best ways to get extra damage on every attack on an enemy, and they don't have to be weapon attacks, which again is not always easy to come by in 5th edition. So the way Hexblade's Curse works, for those who don't know, that you use it as a bonus action. You curse a single target that you can see within 30 feet, and then for 1 minute you get to add your proficiency bonus, which is a 4 for us right now, in damage to all damage rolls against the target. Also, you crit against that target on a 19 or better, which is really great actually for us, where we are rolling with advantage most of the time and making lots and lots of attacks. And if they die, then you regain some hit points. And yeah, it's a little overpowered. We're going to use it anyway. And you don't have to. That's okay. If you want to, die on the I'm not taking Hexblade's hill, and no one will be upset with you. And I hope that you don't die. I don't think you will. I don't know why you would. Anyway, we also get Hex Warrior. We don't get much out of Hex Warrior because we're already proficient in medium armor and shields and martial weapons, and we're not making weapon attacks, so using charisma for weapon attacks doesn't really benefit us a whole lot. But if we ever wanted to, we could use charisma as our attack stat for weapon attacks. We also, of course, get Warlock spells. There are plenty of good options for Warlock spells. Just keep in mind that they don't stack with your Sorcerer spells as per the multi-classing spellcaster rules, right? You have one first level Warlock spell that resets on a short rest, and then you have your Sorcerer spells that reset on long rests, and they are separate and distinct, and never the twain shall meet. Now, of course, you can use the Warlock spell slot to cast a Sorcerer first level spell, or you could use a Sorcerer spell slot to upcast one of your Warlock spells. That's nice. For that reason, I would probably look here to get things that are unique to Warlock, like, say, Armor of Agathis, which can give you some nice additional tankiness and damage returned to your attacker if they hit you, or Hellish Rebuke, which you can use as a reaction to hurt an enemy who's hit you. You're probably going to want to get Eldritch Blast. I'm not going to use it a whole lot. We might have use for it later. Right now, the numbers say that we're not going to use it much. Maybe once we hit level 11. Damage report at level 9. We've added a lot of damage since last time to our Nova round, right? So first, to set it up, we are again going to be using Hex as a bonus action, and then hitting him with a Firebolt. And then the next round, our Nova round, we're going to bonus action Hexblade Curse, and then use a 3rd level Scorching Ray, Action Surge, 3rd level Scorching Ray, for a total of 8 rays that do 2d6 each, plus 1d6 for Hex, plus 4 for Hexblade's Curse, plus 4 more to the very first hit that lands, with both castings of Scorching Ray, right, for 8 total damage since we're casting it twice. That's thanks to Elemental Affinity, of course, right? So for a total of 24d6 plus 40 potential damage in our Nova round. Against an enemy with a 10 armor class, we will be doing, on average, 128 damage, and against an enemy with a 16 armor class, it's 114 damage on this round. And yikes, it almost doubled since last time we checked. Still, we're just sort of comfortably in the middle of the pack compared to other Nova builds, which is not a slight in any way to this build. I think those other builds were made to be big burst round builds, right? And so to be keeping up with them is great, and is actually sort of a pleasant surprise, I think, to me when I created this. Right. As far as I'm concerned, this is sort of the core of the build, right? Most D&D campaigns don't go very far past this point, if they even make it this far to begin with. But, 9, 10, 11, that's a fairly typical endpoint for most D&D campaigns. So the question is, where do you want to go from here if you're going to take this character beyond 9th level? We're doing a lot of damage. We're decently tanky. We're throwing out 8 attacks on our Nova round, flamethrowing with glee. So, there are some potential branches here, I think, that we can explore. So here's the thing. As far as just your Nova damage goes, there's nothing really in the Sorcerer spell list at higher level spells, that is, that we would be using instead of Scorching Ray for single target burst damage. You might disagree with me, but I can't find anything that competes with, just upcasted Scorching Ray on a single target when we're adding Hex and our proficiency bonus to every single attack. Even Meteor Swarm at 9th level would do less damage on a single target. Of course, it devastates groups, and that's not why you take Meteor Swarm, right? But still. So the question is, do you want to keep scaling the damage? Is that what's most important? Or is what's most important to you to get to 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, and even 9th level Sorcerer spells, right? So that you can do all of the other cool things that higher level Sorcerer spells will let you do. If your primary concern is getting to those higher level spells as soon as possible, and let's be honest, who could blame you, then you should stick with Sorcerer. And actually, in that case, if you are going to play this character past level 9 and you do want to stick with Sorcerer also, to get more meta magic options and sorcery points and things like that, then I actually probably would go Divine Soul Sorcerer with this build. And again, I'll talk more about that in the final thoughts, so check that out. On the other hand, if your primary concern is just to continue to increase your damage in your Nova round, then we might want to go a different route. The important thing here is to make sure that if we multiclass more, we need to do so by multiclassing into another character that is a full caster, right, and not a warlock, so as not to impede our spell slot progression. Because we want to keep upcasting Scorching Ray higher and higher for more and more rays, right? But there's only one spell that's missing from our arsenal, and I want to go get it, and it would do wonders for our Nova damage, and actually for all of our damage, to be honest with you. And our options for it are basically Wizard, Cleric, or Lore Bard. Let's see if you can guess which spell I'm talking about. Wizard would be nice, but I just did a Wizard last week, and our intelligence is garbage, so I'm not going to go that route. Bard would be easy because our charisma, it's a charisma-based caster, and if you went Lore Bard at level 6, you could pick up this spell, because you can pick up basically any spell that's, 3rd level or lower as a Lore Bard. And of course, in the meantime, you'd get to add Bard levels and become more a jack of all trades that can help buff and heal your allies and things, which is great. And in fact, I think a valid option for our path here. I think I'm going to go Cleric. And it's really for one primary reason that I think could be very powerful and fun. Of course, as a Cleric, you get some nice support features and turn undead and all these things that we're going to get into. And I think it can work really nicely with our story thus far. But you think it over, listen to the final thoughts at the end, and then make the decision that you think works best for you and your character from this point forward. But for us, at level 10, we are going Cleric 1. So at this point, our ancestor has revealed themselves to us, and we are so in awe of them that we fully become a disciple. We want to just worship them and join the religion, right? So, I mean, perhaps they turn out to be, none other than Bahamut himself. Whatever the reason, we've decided to take a more worshipful path now. So at level 1, clerics get to choose their subclass, their divine domain, and I want to go Tempest Cleric. For one main reason that we'll get into later, but also beyond this sort of tactical reason for going Tempest here. I just really like the lightning theme. It's not fire, but it is elemental, and I see them, maybe it's because I've watched The Last Airbender so much, I see them as closely linked. It's elemental. It's like we're expanding our repertoire of elements that we harness and have mastery over. I mean, maybe the god you're worshiping is Tiamat instead, and you're trying to sort of master all 5 elements to match each of her heads. I don't know. Anyway, as a Tempest Cleric, at level 1, we get Wrath of the Storm, which tells us that when a creature within 5 feet of us hits us with an attack, we can do 2d8 lightning or thunder damage, pending a dexterity saving throw. It's a nice little to have, especially if you don't want to spend a spell slot on, Hellish Rebuke or something. And then, of course, we get spells as a Cleric. Cantrips and first level spells, and honestly, you're probably just going to want the usual sort of cleric support spells here. Guidance, cure wounds, healing word, things like that. I have a thing, don't I, for Nova characters who can also support later. I've done several of them now. But anyway, keep in mind you do have 4th level spell slots now, thanks to the way that multiclassing works with full spellcasters. And a 4th level spell slot would give us 5 Scorching Rays when we upcast Scorching Ray. At level 11, we're a Cleric 2, and we get Channel Divinity. So you get 1 Channel Divinity per short rest, and like all clerics, you can use it to either turn undead and force undead creatures to have to make a saving throw or basically run away from you, or Tempest Clerics get another option, and it is Destructive Wrath. This is a fun ability. And so when you deal lightning or thunder damage, you can instead use Channel Divinity to do max damage instead of rolling the dice, right? Now, we don't have a ton of lightning or thunder damage spells, but what we do have is the Transmute spell metamagic option. So probably the best use for us with this would be to throw out a fireball, spend a sorcery point to change it from fire damage to lightning damage, and then cackle with glee as every single target that gets hit by that lightning ball takes 48 damage. If you cast it at the 3rd level, and assuming that they fail their dex save, of course. You almost assuredly should not use Destructive Wrath to cast Scorching Ray, transmute it to lightning, and then try and get max damage there, because rules as written, it should only apply Destructive Wrath to one of the rays, right? To one of those 2d6s. And so really we're talking an increase of 5 damage on average. Instead of 7 damage on average, 2d6, you do 12, right? What's worse is that we also then wouldn't get our elemental affinity, which is a 4 right now. So you're adding 5 instead of 4 on one of the rays. It's a difference of 1 damage, right? Now, if you crit on one of those rays, you transmute it to lightning and then crit, maybe you could use Destructive Wrath there. You'd get a little more mileage out of it, 15 extra damage or something like that on a crit, because you're doubling the dice, right? And that's not terrible. It's a little underwhelming still, I think, but not the worst idea. Of course, again, rules as written, this should only apply to a single ray of Scorching Ray. And so if you transmute it to lightning, one of the rays would be able to do max damage. If you can convince your DM that max damage should apply to all of the rolls of that spell, of every single ray of all of those 2d6s, then you just won the lottery. Do not look that gift horse in the mouth, and sure, fire away and do crazy damage with your lightning ray. But I'm guessing most DMs will poo-poo on that idea, as they probably should. At level 12, we're a Cleric 3, and we get 2nd level Cleric spells. Again, I'd probably just go with the usuals for Clerics here. Aid, Lesser Restoration, things like that. And again, we can double as a decent little support character here, which is fun. You could consider taking Spiritual Weapon as well, which is kind of a Cleric staple. Would give you a nice little bump to your bonus action damage after your burst round is over. I don't know if we'd want to spend the spell slots, frankly. And there are other things that we might want to be doing with our bonus action, like, casting or transferring Hex to a new target, potentially using Quicken Spell. We could Quicken Eldritch Blast and cast Eldritch Blast as an action there. With Hex up, it's pretty decent sustained damage. Better than the Spiritual Weapon would give us anyway. Of course, it would cost a sorcery point, a couple of sorcery points to quicken a spell. But anyway, consider it. It's a maybe. At level 13, we are a Cleric 4, and I failed to mention that at level 12, we do get 5th level spell slots now, meaning Scorching Ray would be 6 rays total. But anyway, at Cleric 4, we get another ability score increase or feat, and I want to bump our charisma, so we finally have our charisma capped at 20. Hooray! So let's do a damage report at level 13. Our tactics haven't changed much since last time. We're basically doing all of the same thing on our Nova round and to set up our Nova round, but we've increased our charisma, our proficiency bonus has gone up, and we now have 2 5th level spell slots to use for Scorching Ray if we wanted to, giving us a total of 12 rays, 12 attacks during our bonus round. So against an enemy with a 10 armor class, we would be on average doing 221 damage. And against an enemy with a 17 armor class, we would still be clearing the 200 level at 205 damage on average. Man, go you little kobold, go. Go you little kobold, go. Man. Go you little kobold, go.
Go.
But builds that I've done outperforming this one right now are the Evoker Wizard from last week, but that was total damage on 3 targets, and the Sorcerer build, that ridiculous thing that I probably don't have a card to link to anymore, but that only worked if they got Surprise on their target. And it's about to get much better. At level 14, we're a Cleric 5. We get Destroy Undead, so now when we use Channel Divinity to turn undead, it will outright destroy any undead of a challenge rating 1/2 or lower who fail their save. I doubt at level 14 we're going to be running into a lot of those, but you never know. But then we get 3rd level Cleric spells. Mass Healing Word is a pretty decent, efficient heal. Revivify is our first resurrection spell. But the main reason we're here, and the main reason that we multi-classed into Cleric at all, was to pick up Spirit Shroud. And I know some of you are screaming, Divine Soul Sorcerer. Just hold your horses. We'll get there, right? Okay, Spirit Shroud. Spirit Shroud is amazing. It costs a bonus action to cast. It requires your concentration. It lasts for a minute. And so basically we're doing this now instead of Hex, right? And every attack you make... you don't cast it on a person, you just cast it. And now every attack you make deals an extra 1d8 of either necrotic, radiant, or cold damage. You choose when you cast it, and I love this because now we have sort of another element in our arsenal. Any creature that takes this damage cannot regain hit points until your next turn, but there is a range limit here. You have to be within 10 feet of an enemy to get this bonus damage. So our risk level goes up a little bit with this additional reward. Also, any creature of our choice that starts its turn within 10 feet of us has its speed reduced by 10 feet until your turn. The great thing about this spell, and the thing that makes it so powerful, is that unlike Hex, it actually scales when you upcast it. You have to go 2 more levels of upcasting in order to benefit, but as a 5th level spell, it does 2d8 per attack instead of 1d8. And at 7th, it does 3d8. And yeah, this is when things really start to get crazy for us, because we're making so many attacks on that burst round of damage that adding now for us at this level 2d8 to each of them, plus Hexblade's Curse, just sends our damage to the moon. It's crazy. And we do have 6th level spell slots now. One thing that I failed to mention, since Spirit Shroud can be cold damage if we want, I don't know why we couldn't transmute it to, say, fire damage to do some extra damage, at least on sort of one application of it, right? Thanks to elemental affinity, which is cool. Or we could potentially transmute it to lightning damage for some additional shenanigans, which I'll get into at level 15. We're a Cleric 6. And first off, we get 2 Channel Divinities per short rest now. And don't forget that thanks to Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, we can actually turn our unused Channel Divinities into spell slots using the Harness Divine Power feature, which is really great. The spell slot can only be half of our proficiency bonus rounded up. So that's a 3rd level spell slot for us right now, if we wanted to turn that Channel Divinity into one. And, you know, honestly, that's likely better use of our Channel Divinity than doing max damage on a lightning spell. Unless maybe you're doing a transmuted, fireball into a lightning ball to hit a bunch of grouped up enemies, I think. Now we get two per short rest, which is really nice. Potentially 2 3rd level spell slots a day. But the main reason that we wanted to go Tempest Cleric of all the Cleric options was for Thunderbolt Strike. So... Now, when we deal lightning damage to a large or smaller creature, we can push it 10 feet away from us. This is the most fun thing ever. So, okay, when we spend a sorcery point to transmute Scorching Ray from fire to lightning, right, we're now throwing out multiple lightning attacks each turn, correct? To be clear, with 1 6th level spell slot and 1 5th level spell slot right now, we could, if we wanted to, using Action Surge and 2 sorcery points to transmute both of these Scorching Rays, we would be making 13 total Scorching Lightning Ray attacks. Thunderbolt Strike puts no limit or qualifier on this push effect. It doesn't say once per turn. It doesn't say proficiency bonus times per day. It just says when you deal lightning damage, you can push the target. and we are dealing lightning damage potentially 13 times in a turn. So as far as I can tell, rules as written, that means you could potentially move an enemy or a group of enemies up to 130 feet in this single round. And that's just hilarious and awesome. I mean, the range of Scorching Ray is only 120 feet. If you hit somebody with all 13 blasts and push them every single time, you would move them out of the range of your own spell, right? And of course, you don't have to. That's the great thing about Scorching Ray. You don't have to just target a single creature. So yeah, you could. I mean, I love the idea of this little kobold running around and just like push you back, push. I mean, all over the battlefield, you pushing people off of cliffs, pushing them into, an ally's control spell. At the very least, pushing them like 30 plus feet away from your group, melee enemies, pushing them 30 plus feet away. So then on the next turn, they can't even make an attack. They got to use their action to run up or maybe dash up to make attacks. It's so powerful and so hilarious, and I just love it with all of my heart. In fact, it's almost enough to make me want to totally redo this character and start with cleric and get 6 levels of cleric, and then you'd have to get 3 levels of sorcerer, so you could do this kind of thing at level 9, of course, not quite to the same extent, but anyway, it's awesome and fun. Do keep in mind that, again, if you're doing this and pushing targets away, they'll likely not be standing next to an ally now. Therefore, you would lose your pack tactics advantage that you get from kobolds. So, use it with caution. It's not really to be done for damage, obviously, unless you're pushing somebody off a cliff or something. But it's fantastic control. And I just love it. Oh, and don't forget, you could, again, transmute a fireball and turn it into a big lightning ball, couple it with your channel divinity for massive AoE damage, and every single target that it hit now could also be pushed back 10 feet, which is really... All right. I think we got what we came for with Cleric. So at level 16, I think it's time to finish the build off in Sorcerer to pick up some additional sorcery points, among other things. You could go Warlock. Warlock wouldn't be bad here, I think, to maybe get like a Pact Boon, some invocations, even Fighter, to get a Fighter subclass. But anyway, you do what you want to do. We're going to go Sorcerer here. You get 4th level spells as a Sorcerer, level 7. Lots of great options, your choice. None of them are going to improve our damage, so knock yourself out. Banishment, Charm Monster, Polymorph, Dimension Door, Greater Invisibility, Wall of Fire, etc., etc., etc. And we also get a 7th level spell slot now, which is fantastic. At level 17, Sorcerer 8, we get our final ability score increase or feat. I think I'd probably go Elemental Adept here. Some of you may feel like we needed to do this earlier with all of the fire focus that we're doing, right? But I don't know, maybe not. Anyway, you could go Warcaster here. You could go Resilient Wisdom, actually would bump you to a 14 Wisdom and give you proficiency in your Wisdom save. Honestly, that's probably the smartest thing to do here, but I don't claim to do the smartest thing. I really like Elemental Adept here for a couple of reasons. Really, primarily one, when we take this feat, we choose an elemental damage type, fire, obviously, and now spells that of that damage type ignore enemy resistance. If they have resistance to fire, we ignore that resistance. And fire is a commonly resisted damage type, especially by now, level 17. And while, yes, we could transmute a spell to avoid that resistance, doing so means we would miss out on a little bit of extra damage from our elemental affinity, but also it would cost us a sorcery point, and we only have 8 of them per long rest. So I suppose we do get a tiny damage bump as well. Any 1 on a damage die that's from a fire spell is treated as a 2. So very small damage increase. Final damage report then at level 17 has us casting Spirit Shroud as a 7th level spell during your prep round 1. You're going Spirit Shroud and then, coupled with Eldritch Blast at this point, I think during round 1, since it would fire 4 times, and that's an extra 3d8 thanks to Spirit Shroud on each one of those attacks. That's not a terrible round 1. But then on round 2, bonus action, Hexblade's Curse, and then hitting your target with a level 6 Scorching Ray, Action Surge, level 5 Scorching Ray for 13 total rays that would each do an extra 3d8 for Spirit Shroud, plus 6, which is our proficiency bonus now, so Hexblade's Curse, plus 2 helpings of our Elemental Affinity for 5 more damage each, for a grand total of 26d6 plus 39d8 plus 88 damage. Assuming that we have advantage, all 1s or 2s for the fire portion anyway, and critting on a 19 or better. Against an enemy with a 10 armor class, we would do 415 damage on average. And against an enemy with an 18 armor class, it would be 384 damage on average. Holy crap, you are a veritable Gatling gun of fiery destruction. It's absurd. Enemies that you could one-shot include, but are not limited to, any adult dragon, though you'd have to transmute the spell versus some of them, a handful of ancient dragons, actually, Yansi Bin, a Leviathan, a Pit Fiend, and Baphomet. Final thoughts. That was absurd. Did I say that weapon users had an advantage for single target Nova damage? Now, admittedly, this character could only put out this level of damage once per long rest, right? So let's be clear there. And, that said, with the help of sorcery points and potentially turning Channel Divinity into, more spell slots, you could still do like hundreds of damage in a Nova round every short rest throughout, an adventuring day, unless your DM makes you do like 8 to 10, encounters per long rest or something like that. Most of the time, especially at the end there, level 17, you're just not even going to run into enemies that can survive the amount of damage that you can dish out. Single enemies, that is. The nice thing about Scorching Ray, of course, is that you're making lots of attacks. So you could just keep hitting the first target until it's dead, and then, turn your rays on, target number 2. Poor target number 2. So the risk of overkill isn't super bad with this build, I think, which is nice. I think it would be an absolute blast to play, pun intended. And, especially for me, the part where you're transmuting the spell to lightning and pushing your enemies all over the place was kind of my favorite thing about it. But anyway, I promised to talk about Divine Soul, so let's talk about it. Some of you are probably thinking, if the main reason you went 5 levels into Cleric was to get Spirit Shroud, why not just go Divine Soul Sorcerer that gets access to Cleric spells from the beginning and gets Spirit Shroud earlier and not have to multi-class as much? So let's discuss why. Yes, the nice thing about Divine Soul is that it gives you access to the Cleric spell list. So you now have 2 whole classes worth of spells to choose from, among other things, from the get-go. That's awesome. Your armor class would be lower than the Draconic option unless you were using, Mage Armor, which would cost you a spell slot, only lasts for 8 hours, might have some funky kind of, oops, my Mage Armor ran out moments there, can be dispelled too, for that matter. Your HP would be lower, so that's another slight drawback. And you wouldn't get that extra damage on a fire spell thanks to Elemental Affinity that the Draconic Sorcerers get. But eventually, when you hit level 5, you could get Spirit Shroud. And that is better than Hex. The thing is this. Because of the loss of the Elemental Affinity damage, right, that we were getting, moving to a 1d8 for Spirit Shroud from a 1d6 for Hex is actually less damage because we lose that Elemental Affinity until we get Action Surge and we're casting more rays, right? But then it's just a wash. It's even. So you have to be 10 feet away using Spirit Shroud. It costs a higher level spell for the same amount of damage, or worse, early. Now, once you get 5th level spell slots, which for this character comes at level 12, right? And you can upcast Spirit Shroud to a 2d8 per attack. Then the damage increase going Divine Soul over Draconic is significant. You're talking 30 to 40 more damage at levels 12 and 13 only. But the version that I had just talked about, where we multiclassed into Cleric, gets that spell at 14th level and has the same number of spell slots, the same level of spell slots, right? And so the advantage for the Divine Soul Sorcerer is really only for 2 levels, at level 12 and 13. And actually, the Cleric version jumps back ahead because of the elemental affinity. So yes, going Divine Soul makes you hit a lot harder at levels 12 and 13, and then the same or worse at all other levels, basically. It leaves you squishier, it leaves you with fewer resources early on. That said, it would be a way to let you have your cake and eat it too, right? Basically, you would get very comparable damage, sometimes better, but otherwise very comparable, and letting you just focus on sorcerer levels to pick up more sorcery points, to pick up more meta magic options, the ability to fly at level 14, and of course, most importantly, those higher level spells that we just never got to, right? So ultimately, for me, if I were going to play this character in game, I really don't know which way I would go. I think it'd be about 50-50. Of course, those higher level spells and meta magic options and sorcery points would be nice. Nice to have, but I just really loved the idea of the kobold that was descended from and got its magic from dragons so much that I couldn't give it up. Plus, that forced enemy movement from the Tempest Cleric was so fun. It doesn't come till late, I know, but it was just so fun that I wanted to stick it in the build. So anyway, obviously, you take the path that you want. I don't think there's a wrong decision here. I think there's great arguments for both. That's the show for the week. I love you guys. You're fantastic. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you will like and subscribe and consider joining the channel as a member to support us. I really appreciate that. But in the meantime, I hope you have a fantastic day, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks for watching. Take care.